We're going to start today by looking at how to constrain sketches in Fusion. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to create a new sketch. So I'm going to click to create a new sketch, and I'm going to create that sketch on the front plane here. So I'll go ahead and click to create that. When I have the sketch created, I'm going to go ahead and click on the line tool. When I do that, I'm going to start from the origin point here. So when I click on the origin, I'm going to click and release my mouse button. I'm going to drag a line out, and I'm going to click. One thing that I want you to notice right now is that our unit is set up in inches. So I'm going to go ahead and click to place that line. Then I'm going to hit escape on my keyboard, and we're actually going to change this dimension to millimeters. So if I go under document settings and click on units, I can change between inches and millimeters right here. So we'll want to make sure that you're in millimeters, so go ahead and click that, and I'll click OK. From here, I'm going to get my line tool again. I'm going to draw a line straight up vertical. Notice that when you get close to vertical, it kind of snaps in. So you do have a vertical line. I'll click to place that. I'm going to go over a little bit this way, click to place. Right now the dimension doesn't necessarily matter. So I'm going to click to place a line at an angle here, go up, click to place another line, over, and come down, click to place another line, an angle this way. And then I'm going to go down to this bottom origin point, and I'm going to hover over that with my mouse without clicking. And I'm going to click to place a line so it's in line with that origin point. So you can see how when I hover over that, it snaps into the correct location. And I'm going to go ahead and click to place that line. From here, I'm going to use the extend tool to extend this line to that point there. So the extend tool is under modify. So I'll go ahead and click that, and I'll click extend. I'll click on my line here to extend it out to the endpoint of our sketch. When you do that, your inside of your shape should become shaded, and that lets you know that your sketch is closed. And so instead of creating lines, we have generated a shape. One thing I want you to notice is that if I click on these lines, I can move my sketch all around, and these lines will move with me. So you can totally mess up your sketch and make it look nothing like the intent of the design when I first started, just by clicking some lines and pulling them around. Alright? That's because our sketch is not constrained yet. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to where I have something similar to what we started with, and we're going to talk about sketch constraints. And so all of these little symbols on our sketch are sketch constraints that do different things. And so if I look at this symbol right here, this is a constraint for perpendicular. And so what this constraint is doing is it is making this line and this line perpendicular to each other. And so that means they form at a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that constraint and delete it. And I'll click on this constraint, this perpendicular right here, and delete it. One more, delete it. One more, delete it. And right click on it again, one more, and delete it. And once you have all of those perpendicular constraints removed, you can see that the geometry will act a little different. So I'll go ahead and delete these perpendicular constraints as well. Select all of those and click OK. And now I notice when I move the geometry, I can move it more freely now because these lines are not perpendicular to each other. So sometimes when you create sketches, there will be automatic constraints added to it, like in this case. And sometimes you'll have to add those constraints on your own. So you can see how the geometry reacts when those constraints are taken off the object. The next thing we're going to do is hit escape on your keyboard again to clear any commands you have. I'm going to get a line tool, and I'm going to come over here to line type on my sketch palette. So your sketch palette's here, and I'm going to click on construction line. So what a construction line is it's a line that's used to help you construct the geometry you're trying to create. And so when I have that selected, I'm going to come up here to the top of my sketch, and I'm going to hover over this point right here, and you'll notice a triangle. That triangle is symbol for midpoint. So that is the center of this line right here. So it's finding the center of that line. So that's what I want to do, and I'm going to go ahead and drag a line down to the bottom of my sketch here, and I'm going to click to place that construction line on that sketch. Now what we want to do is what we did with that construction line is we were able to find this point down here. We want this point to line up with our origin, so I'm going to use a sketch constraint to do that. So if I click on the coincident constraint, I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Then I can click on this point here and then my origin, and it will move that midpoint that we created with the construction line to the origin point. I'll go ahead and hit escape on my keyboard, and I'll try to move that line, and I notice that this line, it will get longer or shorter, but it won't leave that point yet because we've created a constraint on that point. The next geometric constraint we'll look at, I'll go ahead and click the little drop down here, is perpendicular. So I'm going to go ahead and click perpendicular, and if I click on this baseline and this line, it will create a perpendicular line between those 2 points. And so a perpendicular constraint is good if you want 90-degree corners. So if I hit escape on my keyboard, I can still move this corner in and out, but this line and this line are always going to stay 90 degrees from each other. I'm going to go ahead and grab another perpendicular constraint, and I'm going to create a perpendicular constraint between those 2 lines, a perpendicular between these two lines, these 2 lines over here, and then these 2 lines. So I've added several perpendicular constraints to my sketch now. So again, that's a geometric constraint that can be used. Next constraint I'm going to look at is the equal constraint. And so again, I'll go ahead and hit escape on my keyboard, and I'm going to click the equal constraint, and I'm going to say I want this line to be equal to that line. So what that does is it creates an equal constraint between these 2 lines, so those lines will always be of equal length. Alright, I'll go ahead and apply an equal constraint to this line, this line, this line, and this line. And I'll go ahead and hit escape on my keyboard, and I'll try to move the geometry to kind of see where we're at with this. So you can see that all of these lines remain equal based on the geometry that we have selected. The last 2 lines that I'm going to make equal are these 2 right here. So I'll click on those 2 lines and make those 2 lines equal. So now when I click to move my geometry, notice that everything moves equally how we have it defined with our geometric constraints. So there are many different geometric constraints that can be used for different circumstances in your design of your sketches when you're creating those. We're now going to talk about dimensional constraints. So over here under the sketch or the create tab, there's a dimension button. I'm going to go ahead and click that, and I'm going to click on this baseline right here. And I see that when I click on that, I get a dimension that comes up. So I'm going to go ahead and change this base dimension for this part to 100, and see how it totally throws off the geometry that I was trying to create with that part. So I'm going to go ahead and hit undo to take that back to what we started with, and we're going to apply some other dimensional constraints to this part first. Alright, so I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on this line, and I'm going to make that constraint 15 millimeters. So what that did is it constrained this line to this line and made them 15 millimeters apart. I'm going to go ahead and constrain this line, and I want you to know what happens, or look at what happens when I change the dimension of this to this line over here. So I'm going to change that to 20 millimeters, and notice that this line changes automatically because we have an equal constraint between those two dimensions. I'm going to change this line up here to 20 millimeters. So it's going to get fairly small there. And I'm going to change the height of this to 20 millimeters. I'm going to click this point here and this point, and I'm going to make the overall height 45 millimeters. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to change this bottom dimension again to 100 millimeters. So you can see how those constraints have affected the geometry. I have one more dimensional constraint to put in, so I'm going to put in a dimension from here to the center point of this object, and I'm going to make that exactly 50 millimeters. Notice when I do that all of the geometry in our design goes from blue to black. And so anytime we create a sketch, we want to create a fully constrained sketch. And you know that the sketch is fully constrained when all of the lines, all of the geometry have turned black. I can go ahead and edit these dimensions. I can go ahead and come in and edit these dimensions and change the geometry of the part by editing some of those dimensions. But everything that we've defined is still defined in the part. So all of the geometry, all of the constraints we've added are still defined. So anytime you create a sketch, you want it to be black and fully defined.